Welcome to the Accounting Arc Podcast, where analysis, reaction, and comedy collide to tackle the big topics from the world of accounting and beyond. Join our trio of transformation agents as they discuss the hottest topics in and out of the profession, from breaking down industry trends, to reacting to everyday events, to uncovering the hidden humor in numbers. With wisdom, insight, and a dash of levity, they're proving that accounting isn't just about the numbers. It's about life. Because after all, accounting is in everything. The Accounting Arc Podcast starts now.
All right, welcome everyone back to another episode of Accounting Arc. Unfortunately, Liz is traveling, or maybe fortunately for her, Liz is traveling, so she's not with us today. So I am glad to have Ron Baker with us today. If you've been following some of the previous episodes we've done, you know that we have already talked about CPA and being able to use the CPA as an individual licensure. We have also talked about firm licensure and the reason accounting firms are licensed. Well, Ron is with us today because we wanted to just look at the topic of licensure as a whole. Like, should there even be licensure and what's kind of the history behind licensure? And with that, I'm going to pass it to Ron because he has some great background for us.
All right. Well, thanks you guys for having me on. And I just wanted to talk about what does it mean to be a profession, not so much a professional, but a profession. Well, this has actually got a very rich history. Anthropologists, sociologists have been writing on this for literally probably centuries. You can go back to the code of, Hammurabi and the code of ancient Babylon and find regulations of the professions. But profession comes from the Latin professio. It means to declare publicly, to own freely, to acknowledge, to avow. In other words, a profession should profess something. A profession takes a stand. And if you look at the history of professions in America, early 17th till the mid 18th century, it was dominated by theology. That was considered the preeminent profession. Mid 18th and 19th century, it was actually theology, law, and then medicine and education started to emerge. It wasn't until about 1925 that doctors became the preeminent profession. That was probably because prior to germ theory in the 1860s, if you went to a doctor, they probably did more harm than good because they drew blood, they stabbed a lancet in you. In fact, one of the most prestigious journals is still called The Lancet, which I think is crazy. But
wow,
anyway, under the United States Constitution, occupational licensing. So I'm not just talking about professional licensing, although it includes that, but occupations like barbers and electricians and florists and, believe it or not, interior decorators. These are all things that are licensed in the various states. And the U.S. Constitution grants the states the power to do this because of the residual powers, basically the 9th and 10th Amendment. So that's why the ultimate occupational licensing is dominated by the states, the state government, not the federal government, not the AICPA. And basically, sociologists have come to kind of an agreement that there's three characteristics that make up a profession. The first one is expertise. You have a common body of knowledge. I mean, if I were to throw a bunch of British chartered accountants in a room with American accountants, we talk the same language, we have the same issues running our practice. There's that common body of knowledge that we've all been through. And the second requirement of a profession is autonomy and exclusion. A profession has to be able to decide who enters and how they exit for disciplinary problems or fraud or whatever it might be. And autonomy is really important. It's an interesting word, comes from Greek. It means self-governance. It doesn't mean license, freedom to do whatever you want. It comes with responsibility. And the third, and you'll see this in every profession's code of ethics somewhere, the spirit of service. That you have to put the public's interest above your own. And when they conflict, definitely the public's interest comes before the profession or the professional's interest. So those are the three criteria. Now, why is that important? Well, because we get into these arguments in courts about, for instance, is journalism a profession? Journalists will tell you they are. They say we're a profession, but they don't meet these criteria. All three of us could declare we're journalists tomorrow, right? There's no autonomy and there's no exclusion. Now, sure, ABC, NBC newspapers might have their own standards and might kick you out if you violate them, but it has nothing to do with licensure. So I just wanted to kind of set that up because I find this interesting. Take expertise. So in June of 1898, Christine Ross, she was a native of Nova Scotia, passed the CPA exam in New York. Her certificate, number 143, by the way, was withheld until December 21st, 1899. So that's practically a year and a half. Why was it withheld? Because the Board of Regents was deciding whether or not a woman should be certified. Now, please tell me what this has to do with expertise. It's an interesting question. And around autonomy and exclusion is what economists call the grand bargain. We grant certain professions monopoly status. In our case, it's only for attest functions. That's the only monopoly that we have. Everybody else can do every other service a CPA does, but they can't sign off on financial statements. But monopoly status is not a right. It's a privilege, and it can be revoked. And it's really interesting because increases of regulation and legal liability can come along to kind of temper that grand bargain. Sarbanes-Oxley is a great example of that. So you have to sign, and if you're fraudulent, they can throw you in jail. The other thing I want to say about this is President Obama's 2015 Council of Economic Advisors issued an 80-page report. I'll give you the link so you can dump it in the show notes. And it was highly critical of occupational licensure. Now, the federal government can't do anything about it because it's controlled by the states, but they wanted to see some massive deregulation because, and I'm going to argue this, it detracts minorities and women and others, disproportionately poor groups, from stepping on the first rung of the economic ladder. And I think it's a part of our pipeline problem that we don't like to talk about. But there have been studies out there that say the pipeline issue in the CPA profession is why minorities have been excluded. And, we can talk about DEI all day, but if we're going to exclude people from entering the profession, the problem's built in. It's a feature. It's not a bug. Occupational licensure is designed to keep people the hell out so prices can be kept high among the practicing members. I'll stop there.
That's a lot to take in. That's a lot to take in. Since you ended with the DEI one, and that's an area that we've actually been researching at the center, let me pick up from there. So that was some interest. We did some research. We were behind some of the research that the Illinois Society did on that. And actually, the largest issues that we found in their research, and this was a population of over 4,000 respondents, so students and early pre-certification, so getting towards a CPA. So it was a really broad respondent pool. Found that the number one thing was actually time. So it was the fact that they didn't, the firms weren't giving them enough time to study, and then they were trying to balance it against other family obligations, which in a DEI sense, you could argue, because I've heard that one a lot, and I can identify with that one coming up from a lower middle class background, that like you're having, like I worked all through school and everything. So it's you're juggling the things, and studying becomes less of a priority if I have to take care of my family and put food on the table. But those were actually the things. The cost that actually did not actually come up as a significant factor in that research there, which is usually the one that's cited for minorities.
But the time, yeah.
Throw one other thing in there, because I've been involved in AACSB reviews of programs. In that one, I've actually found, and I've been pushing back on the schools that I've talked with because a lot of them tie the additional coursework, which would have gotten to the 150 credit, which we're already seeing a lot of states move back to 120. They were tying those into master's degrees, which has higher costs, which also detracts. So I've been pushing back on a lot of them. Hey, you need to get this down within the bachelor's degree. And so I've seen some movement there, additional credits that are available. Minors in professional accountancy was another interesting one I saw there that makes it fundable by the scholarships that someone might be receiving at the undergraduate level to be able to qualify to sit. And with the move back to 120, that's going to make that even more accessible. So I feel like there's some things I don't want to just go DI as a whole. There's some things that maybe we need to change with how people are able to sit that are fixable, rather than just the licensure itself being the issue.
Right.
Yeah, I'm curious, Ron, the distinction of profession versus industry, I guess, is probably what the contrast is. And then professional licensing versus occupational licensing. I'm just trying to figure out like what is the importance of that distinction, because I recognize that, and actually, I might think one of the few who I intentionally try to refer to accounting as a profession because of many of the reasons that you cited. But at the end of the day, the licensing between a CPA versus an accountant is very different, depending on the state as well. So I'm just curious, like, what is from your perspective, the importance in that distinction in this conversation?
Yeah, I think it's illustrated by this statistic. In 1950, 1 out of 20 occupations were required some type of license, mandated, before you could practice. Today, it's between 25 and 30%. So it's just grown like weeds. Now, if you ask a hairstylist, a cosmetologist, my dad's a barber, if you ask an interior decorator, they will all say we are a profession. So right. Everybody wants to be a profession because the profession is running to the government asking for licensure. The best predictor of licensure for any group is not the degree of public protection or the public possible danger. It's political organization. It's the professions that run to the state capitol and say, we need to be licensed. And so when you look at this, occupational licensure can come 3 different ways. You can have registration, which is just kind of a list of the government tracking who does what, right? That's all it is. There's certification, which is completely voluntary. Actuaries are not licensed by the state. Sommeliers are not licensed by the state. Priests, ministers, rabbis are not licensed by the state. Auto mechanics are certified. They wear the, what is it, ASME badge, or what you see the patches when you're in the dealership. Those are all voluntary, but licensure is actually mandated before you can practice. So I think, we can sit around and talk about what does it mean to be a profession, a professional, but everybody likes to call themselves a profession because it gives them more gravitas to get licensure from the state.
Yeah. But you're on mute, Donny.
I think, Ron, at the beginning, you differentiated professional from profession, right? With the 3 criteria that you had there. And that's maybe where, but then when you're talking about licensure, you're talking about occupational licensing rather than professional licensing, which tends to be used interchangeably. But as I was listening to you, I feel like that's the difference.
Well, occupational licensure does include the professions.
Yes,
it does.
And
so it's a broader category term.
It's broader, yeah.
Like and here's the thing. This is one of those issues like free trade that economists there's a huge consensus on this. I mean, the number of economists that believe in occupational licensure could probably be stuffed into a Mini Cooper and you'd still have room for a portly chauffeur, right? And here's what economists say, because they've been studying this now for about 100 years. In fact, Milton Friedman wrote his PhD thesis on this very topic.
Oh, wow.
And actually he had some very interesting statistics in that paper. But I'll just give you a broad overview of what economists have found about all occupational licensure. It limits consumer choice, it raises prices, it increases practitioner income, it limits practitioner mobility. How many of us have seen that? It deprives poor of adequate services. It restricts job opportunities for minority, older workers, and I would say even children. It's hard to open a lemonade stand. Stifles innovation and creativity. Had retailing been subject to supermarkets, or had retailing been subject to licensure, supermarkets, big box stores, Amazon, could have never happened. And here's the biggest charge, I think. It fosters groupthink. We can sit around and talk about the criteria to sit for the exam. I say let anybody sit for the exam that wants to, because there's a million different ways to learn. If you got somebody with 190 IQ, they can probably pass the CPA exam with some study, some self-study. Why not let them in? Why do we have to have this groupthink? If you think about it, Thomas Edison, who had no formal education, he couldn't qualify today to sit for the engineer's exam, nor could Frank Lloyd Wright have been qualified to sit for today's architecture exam. What would have been the loss of that?
Well, and I mean, I agree wholeheartedly with respect to standardized testing as just flawed unilaterally in a lot of capacities. I just try to, as I try to navigate a lot of the questions I have, which frankly, I don't know where I stand on it. The thing that I can't let go of is I agree that there's certain harms, but then there's harms to the general public if you don't have something in place, some sort of standards in place to ensure that people are, like, if you're a tattoo artist doing things, or a restaurant from a health code perspective, things to make sure that you're there. If you're an engineer erecting buildings, we need to have regulations with respect to the people who are doing those things. So I struggle to figure out, like, what is the right mix of protecting the public and also cutting down some of those boundaries to give others those opportunities. And I don't know what that is. I'm more just babbling than anything, but I don't know where I land in that
Well,
challenge.
I would build on that. So if we look at our profession, and I'm using that in the very broad term, because we're talking about CPA, but you don't have to be CPA to necessarily be in the practice of accounting, right? Because we have bookkeepers that are not certified or licensed. We have non-EA tax practitioners that are also not certified or licensed. So we have a bunch of people within our profession that are not licensed, that towards Byron's point, it's sort of used at your own risk, right? If you're not going to somebody that is if you're not going to a CPA firm, but you're going to a bookkeeping firm, and you're going to some tax practitioner that's not an EA or CPA, which are usually the two that you're going to look at for identifying someone that's in the practice of tax, then it is kind of, hey, like, go to the restaurant that maybe you don't know that's the hole in the wall, or the street vendor,
Right.
whatever, right? That's kind of the analogy there. So I feel like we actually have those there. And the licensure of CPA doesn't stop any of these people from providing those services.
Yeah, the only thing the license stops is attestation, right? I mean, that's the only monopoly we have. Everything else is subject to competition. And the competition, as you know, is fierce. I mean, H&R Block has been the largest tax provider for, decades. I forget how many returns they do internationally. It's a huge number. Here's how I think about this. Let's talk about licensure. Let's say we're all doctors, and let's say we're all psychiatrists. And we get on this call and we say, you know what? It'd be fun to be a surgeon. Let's be thoracic surgeons, and we'll rehang the shingle outside of our office, and now we're surgeons. Well, if we're licensed doctors in good standing, we can do that. We can do it. We can do it tomorrow. And then we could be a brain surgeon the next day, and then we could be something else the next day. The problem is you're not going to get board certified. So now we're back between the certification and the licensure. No hospital is going to give you surgery privileges. No insurance is going to sell you malpractice because they have their criteria. And Byron, I think that's the answer to your question. It's certification. And certification is what protects the public. On top of tort law, by the way, right? You can sue your doctor for malpractice. So tort and reputational effects are an enormous protector. You know, airlines don't want to kill their passengers. It's not a good business model to kill your customers, right? They don't buy again. So I think it's actually certification that protects the public, not the licensure.
Well, and I mean, yes, I get that, and that's the general public generally doesn't understand certification. So it's really the bodies that respect those certifications, like you said, the insurance or the employers and those types of things that rely on that certification, which makes a lot of sense. I think it's weird for accountants, right? Because there is confusion because people will say, like, I mean, it is certified public accountant, but we're actually not operating as a certification.
Right.
We're operating as a license only.
Yep.
And which is confusing then with the IMA or other certifications that you can become QuickBooks certified for that matter. So it's, I think a lot of it, and this is where we landed on some of our earlier conversations, there's so much difficulty in public education around the distinctions between all of these things and what they even mean from a buyer's perspective that is a major challenge.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I don't think the general public understands licensure. Nobody, I mean, when was the last time you walked to the wall and looked at your doctor's license? You know?
Right.
No, you just assume that they're in practice, they probably have insurance, they're probably competent. So that's more, I think that can be done by certification. So I don't know, maybe we can jump right to what would be some of the reforms that myself and economists have proposed to deal with this issue. I think we should repeal the CPA licensure. And I think the AICPA or the state societies could certify CPA competency, pass the exam. Maybe states have their own exam. Let 1,000 flowers bloom in the marketplace. We have different automobile companies, and I'll tell you, building an automobile is a hell of a lot more risky than providing audit services, right? And yet we don't sit around and license automobile manufacturers. We let them into the market. Look at Korea, Kia, Hyundai. They grew up really quick. So repeal the CPA licensure, move to board certifications like doctors, like actuaries, like the mechanics, right? Sommelier is another example. And in order to so-called protect the public, when it comes to a test, let the stock exchanges select and pay the auditors for the companies that are listed on their exchange. They have the most to benefit from the information effects in audits, saying, hey, our company, our listed companies, their auditors are independent because they don't select them. You can't be paid to be independent. This is the 900-pound elephant in the elevator that the profession will completely ignore. I've talked to Barry about this issue, didn't want anything to do with it, but economists look at it and go, this is a joke. These people aren't independent, and incentives matter. And the other thing is let in insurance companies, let Lloyd's of London write financial statement insurance for nervous Nelly investors that think it's really important to have financial statement insurance. Lloyd's of London will do that.
Buy that.
Give them the opportunity to.
In today's world, cyber threats don't just target big businesses. They target you. Your small office or home office is at risk.
There are a lot of solutions out there. Not all of them have the same level of security. The Soho Protection Package is designed to provide proactive cybersecurity solutions.
If your firm is looking for assistance in developing your personalized IT policy, connect with an advisor today at link.improvetheworld.net/Soho Cyber. Gain peace of mind that you have the right technology in place to stay protected.
So to clarify, you're not saying eliminate the CPA.
Not at
You're
all.
saying evolve it to a certification
Yep.
as opposed to a professional license.
Voluntary certification, let anybody sit for the exam, no hour requirements, no CPE requirements, except as promulgated by whatever your certification requirement is. But I'll tell you, the Institute of Chartered Accountants of England and Wales, where our profession started, has no minimum hours for CPE. You just self-report, hey, what do you want to learn this year? And then, or in this 2-year cycle, and then tell us at the end if you learned it and how it advanced your career. There's no reporting of hours. And that's the oldest body. That's where we started as a profession. So I think there's lots of things that we could do to really make us more valuable rather than being granted the monopoly, because as you know, and this is why economists hate this, monopolies don't innovate. And this is why the audit hasn't evolved for 100 years. And this is so well laid out in Baruch Lev's book, The End of Accounting. He was a professor of accounting at NYU, and he wrote a book with another guy called The End of Accounting. And in the first chapter, they lay out U.S. Steel's financial statements from, I think it was 1911 or something, and the one from 1916 or something. It hasn't evolved at all. It's just gotten longer and bigger and thicker and more footnotes, right?
More footnotes.
But less
right.
understanding because there's no innovation, because we're a monopoly. We don't need it.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's a fun exercise. I mean, I love the idea of a certification. I think you see that in the technology space. I mean, I was Microsoft certified at one point. There's a lot of certifications, and frankly, I mean, from a general public perspective, I think you do find actually that there's better marketing campaigns around certifications that happen because they are competing, right? It's not a monopoly. It's a fascinating thought exercise.
I'm reading a book right now that it looks at occupational licensure around the world, so it's not just America focused.
Yeah.
And of course, there's Uber, and that's a classic example of a company that rushed in, and just did it and begged for forgiveness later. Yeah. But the chapter that fascinated me in this book, and I didn't know this, was in 2004, Poland deregulated legal services. And they said, we're still going to have lawyers, and they're still going to be members of the bar and pass the bar and all of that, but we're going to have legal advisors. And these guys can do almost as much as what lawyers can do. There may be some restrictions about certain courts. Maybe they can't go to appeals courts. I'm not sure. But what happened after they deregulated, because now we have 20 years to look at this, and people flooded into that profession with no lower quality, with no increased complaints to the regulatory authorities like the bar about malpractice or unclear billing or whatever, all the major complaints against lawyers, and client satisfaction was really high with these legal advisors. So you don't need a constitutional scholar to draft a conveyance, right? You don't need a surgeon to pierce an ear, but when you get into licensure, they just creep along, and they want more things under their jurisdiction.
Right.
And that's a problem, because it does prevent better access to the poor, minorities, because the prices are higher, and therefore they can't go to a lawyer.
Yep. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know what was going on in 2004, because Germany also had a pretty large deregulation in 2004. Which in 2019, they actually rolled back on a significant portion of it because of the issues that we've mentioned, where there was lower quality, a lot of the issues that licensing is supposed to protect us from crept up. So they ended up, 15 years later, rolling back some of it. So I'm sure there's nuance in what trades, what things were being regulated and where they saw it, because when they rolled it back, they also only rolled it back on about half of the deregulated services. So it's
And,
yeah,
and we saw a lot of rollback and suspension during COVID. A lot of governors said, "Hey, if you're a nurse, get in here. We need all the help we can get." And they suspended scope of practice laws. And even the federal government did this through the Medicare, through, I forget the alphabet soup body that did, I think it's CMS that deals with Medicare. But they suspended a bunch of the scope of practice. So nurse practitioners could give vaccines and do other medical procedures that normally has to be supervised by a physician. One of my favorite laws is in 2007, Salem, Massachusetts, licensed psychics. Now, this is always done to protect the public, right? And we got to have, but by definition, it's literally impossible to have a competent psychic. But they got licensed.
In Salem, Massachusetts, of all places.
And my favorite has got to be the interior designer. It is one of the most difficult to earn. It requires 2,190 days of education and experience. You guys, that's 6 years. You become an interior designer. And they argue, and they've actually said this, you can find the public transcripts. They argue carpets could begin sparking infernos, porous countertops could spread bacteria, mischosen jail furnishings can be used as weapons. I mean, this doesn't pass the laugh test, but it passed the court test to allow the license to continue. Because courts will allow it if there's a public safety issue. They grant a lot of deference to the state legislatures. Illinois barbers and manicurists are licensed, but not electricians. So you could have a shoddy electrical job that burns down the whole neighborhood, but your hair will grow back. Which one protects the public more? I mean, some of these laws, just to give you an example of this, there's about 102 occupations. And Louisiana licenses 71 of them. Wyoming has the fewest of 24. But get this, if this is about protecting the public, then why is it that most of the 102 occupations are practiced somewhere without any license, with no widespread harm, lower prices, more access to the poor, and disadvantaged neighborhoods, things like that? I mean, why does a cosmetologist require 372 days of training and the average EMT requires 33 days? These disparities cannot be answered by public safety or possible public harm. Plus, economists are clever. They look at insurance premiums, because who prices risk better? And they don't find any difference in insurance premiums between unlicensed or licensed practitioners or certified practitioners. So I think economists have really nailed this issue, but you don't see this in our profession. Nobody writes about this. Nobody talks about it. It's just one of those issues. I mean, everybody was freaking out because Florida wanted to get rid of the licensure.
Right.
CPA got its hackles up, and I was like on the sideline applauding. Yeah, do it. Let's go. Let's deregulate this. Bring it back to the states. I also think this would be a huge opportunity for the state CPA societies to really make a difference. I think they're kind of lost at the moment. What do they stand for? I'm not sure they have a vision anymore. They profess anything. This could be a big deal for them. They could step into this game.
I think the large ones do, and that's where I would worry a little if it was at the state level. A lot of the small and mid-sized states, they're really not equipped to be able to handle something like this. So I think your idea of there being a national, whether it's AICPA or whoever it ends up being, that probably makes the most sense to me, which if you kind of think about it, it's effectively the same. It just as what we have now, it just eliminates the boards of accountancies, right? So because
Right.
the state societies would become the equivalent of the boards of accountancies
That's
in
right.
that sense as the licensing or certification representative. I was trying to think how this would play itself through because it cannot only be driven by audit because you've got I mean, by the public market audits, so the exchanges, because you've got a bunch of smaller businesses like the banks, right? They
Mhm.
want the comps and the reviews of the construction companies, and they need it for bonding. So, I mean, there's a broader impact. We would really need to think through who can be an auditor. But then as I think about it too, we're sort of moving this way because with the CAS practices, and I forget the one that just came into effect, but removing comps essentially, or enabling CAS
Mm.
practices to issue financial statements without it being a
Yes.
compilation, that's a move towards I'm not performing an audit or attestation against these financial statements,
Right,
which
right.
really in effect can enable a bookkeeper to do financial statements.
Yep.
Sure,
Yep.
sure.
That's right. Yeah, we just did a webinar on that. I did with the AICPA where she talked about that standard. I forget its number, but yeah, you're
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, and well, and that's where it comes back to. This is where I always fall back is just this public's understanding, right? Because bankers, they like I'm sure there's some who do, but generally speaking, have no understanding of financial statements from Ron, my fiance, she's non-licensed accountant. She has an accounting and bookkeeping practice. She does QuickBooks for her clients. She gets on a monthly basis a request from a banker to give her like signed financial statements. And she's like, kids, I'm hitting print on a QuickBooks file. There's nothing, I'm not signing anything. This is not an audit. I'm not a CPA, but the bankers are like, well, I just need the financials from your accountant, from your CPA. They'll even refer to her as the CPA. And she's like, I'm not a CPA. It just, when it comes to these things of like, providing financial statements from QuickBooks or Xero or whatever the case may be, there needs to be somebody who is the users of those financial statements understand the distinction of, and not some like ASB report or SARS. I think it's SARS 14 or something, SARS
Mhm.
Yeah.
that governs it. To explain it. It's just that they don't, there's no understanding, and they're, potentially making loans. There's people who will,
These are bankers, right? I mean, and they don't
that's what I'm
understand it.
saying.
Yeah, yeah,
That's exactly my point. I mean,
yeah.
if the bankers don't understand it, I can't expect, Bob or Susan down the street who's like, getting a financial statements and somebody saying, invest in my company, and here's my financial statements from my CPA. They just have no idea.
Yeah, yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, that's wild. I don't think the public understands the difference between a comp, a review, and an audit either.
Oh, hell no.
And
Absolutely not.
and one of the things in the End of Accounting book by Baruch Lev is that the information that the audit provides, the audited financial statements, is about 5% of the information investors use to make decisions.
Sure. Yep.
You can argue it's kind of obsolete. It looks backwards, right? The auditors come in after the war and bayonet the wounded.
Yeah. Well, and that was back then. Today, it's probably less than 5%. I mean, most investors never look at a financial statement before they're
Well,
making an
I think it's
investment.
table stakes. I think if you didn't have it, there would be an issue.
Maybe. I think that's a very interesting question because even when and he did this, he went through transcripts of all the earning calls. And they never talked about the finance. Nobody ever asked a clarifying question to the CFO about the financial statements, the footnotes, nothing. They were all focused on the future, whether the leading indicators, what drugs do you have in your pipeline, those types of things. Even to the point where they're having satellites now look at, Walmart's parking lots to try and forecast sales. That has nothing to do with accounting.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, we've all been in the the boardrooms with nonprofits and things where the treasurer gives the financial report and it's crickets. It's like, get this person off the stage so we can get to the next thing.
Yep, the important stuff, the future.
The important stuff.
But, as I'm listening to this, though, I think we still, and as much as we talk about the broader profession, I feel like all three of us immediately got drawn back into CPA as accountancy without recognizing that there is the broader and because I keep hearing Ron say like minority, this and that. And one of my things has been, I don't know that minorities need to get the CPA to have, I give the example of like, I had a Vietnamese friend that was an immigrant. He couldn't pass the CPA exam because he literally said it was the English. That was the barrier for him.
Sure.
So he got his EA. He has a master's in accountancy. So he got his EA. He got his Series 6 and the other one so that he could do insurance and investments. And he is serving nail salon owners and like the estheticians. And
Yep.
he is like that's his thing. And he's helping them with planning, he's helping them with insurance, he's helping them with all the things that we think of as an advisor, a good financial advisor would do.
Yeah.
And so that's where I thought seeing the examples of him, and I've talked to others in the Hmong community, limited in the Black community, and definitely you see it in the Latino community, because in the Latino community, the number of tax practitioners there is so high. And why do all of them have to be CPAs? If a lot of the minorities, especially the immigrant minorities, the passion is about back serving their communities and the people. And we need to stop making it like, if you can't get to CPA, you're a failure. Like if you can go and do all these other certifications, some of which are granted from the state with like the Series 6 and all those types of things, like you should be okay. Or you will be okay, and you can still be an accountant and help the people that you're trying to help.
Yeah, it's fascinating when you look at the occupations that are certified, like the mechanics, like the actuaries. They don't have this pipeline problem that we do. There's a lesson there.
Well, but that's where, when I look at that, it's a CPA pipeline issue rather than an accounting pipeline issue. Is the way I'm increasingly starting to look at this, because we're so focused on CPA, but you see upticks in a bunch of the other certifications.
Yep.
They were seeing those, right? And then again, I haven't looked at this EA and these other ones. I'm gonna bet we've seen an uptick there as well.
Just like you did when
yeah.
doctors started licensing, you saw more people move into podiatry and chiropractic because they couldn't. I mean, Milton Friedman became an economist because the actuarial exams were too hard. And that tells you something, because he was a phenomenal mathematician, statistician, but he couldn't pass the actuarial exams.
Yeah, and that's exams. But I'm appreciating this idea of the CPA being a private certification, as opposed to a public license. It just, I think this is the challenge that I've always had, because I fucking love the CPA. I value the CPA. I understand what it means. I mean, I've not been an accountant for 20 years, but I've kept my CPA because of what it means to be a CPA. And so, this idea of maintaining the value, the distinction of what it means, and with the governing rules of our code of ethics and service to the public, can all be maintained in a certification without having to go through 52 jurisdiction governments in order to make any changes that are 5 years too late by the time you start to get them through.
Yeah, I think we'd be better for it as a profession. I think we'd be more innovative. We'd add more value. We'd be able to experiment with different things. I mean, there's a lot of groupthink in the profession, let's face it. In any profession, I mean,
Sure.
doctors
Yeah.
for the longest time rejected the idea that ulcers were caused by bacteria in the gut. Took two guys from Perth, Australia, 20 years to convince an evidence-based profession that their cocktail of antibiotics cured ulcers. They wouldn't let them publish. They wouldn't let them speak in conferences, publish academic peer-reviewed journals. They couldn't do any of that. It took them 20 years. And they, of course, went on to win the Nobel Prize in medicine. I don't want that to happen to us.
What, was that Bob Pepto and Jim Bismol?
No, no, believe it or not, it was two guys from Australia that were just, tenacious about it and just kept pressing. And the guy actually walked into the lab and drank a petri dish of the bacteria that caught and gave himself an ulcer, and then cured it. And that's when the doctor said, they might have something here. It's an amazing story. There's a great book on it called The Mafia or The Acid Wars that details their journey and all the roadblocks put in front of them. But, and that's pretty common in medicine. In fact, our current FDA commissioner is a guy named Dr. Marty McCarr, and he wrote a book called Blind Spots. Every human being on the planet should read that book. I'm not kidding, because it documents all the things that medicine has gotten wrong just within the last few decades.
Sure.
And they've made some massive, and I mean massive, life-threatening mistakes because of groupthink. We need the cranks, we need the crackpots to sit there for the exam, pass it on their own, and get into this profession and cause a conversation like we're having here.
Yep.
No podcast has addressed this issue.
I have a question. So do you know, because I know that part of the problem in medicine is the fact that their specialties are all divergent. And if I remember correctly, the specialty associations also control the journals that publish.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a differentiator between them and us, because our AICPA and state societies are actually separate from the AAA, which is the Accounting Professors Association. And the Accounting Professors Association is the one that controls not all, but quite a number of the publications. So we actually have a separation of the research arm from the practice arm, and which is effectively the certification arm.
Right. And that might play a role. That's a really interesting question. I've never looked into that, but yeah, there could be an effect there for sure.
Oh, interesting. Well, definitely a lot of stuff for us to. Now I'm going to research some more. But I really thank you, Rod. You've got us all thinking. You can see. I saw Byron over there a lot. I bet I could feel the heat from his head coming off. But a great discussion to kind of round out all of our different episodes on licensure as a whole, and maybe we want to start looking at certification instead. Any closing thoughts?
No, other than I just think, I've got a quote here from Justice William O. Douglas, who said, "The right to work is the most precious liberty that man possesses." And I really do think, and, we can talk about the hair braiding cases that have gone on and all these different weird you need to have a license to be a lightning rod salesman, a yacht salesman. And you got to ask yourself, why do these professions, these organized bodies keep running to the state capitol asking for licensure? There's not a person from the public in the room. And they're doing it because it's the old bootlegger Baptists. The bootleggers and the Baptists get together. Yeah, we need to ban drinking on Sunday. The Baptists are doing it because they don't think it's good for your soul and your family life. And the bootleggers are doing it because everybody's going to go to the speakeasy.
Sales go through the roof.
This is a classic problem. And in this case, the bootleggers are the industry or profession that wants to be licensed. And of course, the Baptists are the politicians, because they always say, well, we're doing this to protect the public.
That's right.
It doesn't work.
Well, that's a great way to close, because I never would have thought of us as accountants as bootleggers, but I think that's one maybe we need to be a little more of.
I think that's the title for this episode.
Bootleggers and Baptists.
And
Excellent.
Baptists.
Excellent. That's a very common economic idea, by the way. So that'd be a great title.
Thanks again for joining us, Ron, and thank all of you out there. We'll see you on another episode.
Thanks, you guys.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
The Center for Accounting Transformation provides business professionals with a network for utilizing innovations that are ready for adoption, the training and resources necessary to apply those innovations, and an opportunity to engage the talent and community needed to further the pursuit of innovative accounting practices that drive responsible and mindful business performance. Find out more at our website, www.improvetheworld.net. And if you're interested in sharing your own transformation stories, please contact us there.